Let's go Dolphins! There are players quietly stealing the coach's attention, unexpected names rising through the team hierarchy, and others already putting themselves in dangerous situations even before the mandatory minicamp begins. And what I'm about to tell you might completely change how you see this competition for roster spots heading into the summer, because one young player is suddenly creating a huge buzz within the organization, while another is already starting to worry people with recurring problems that simply refuse to disappear. The craziest part? Some media members covering training camp are already hinting that some of these performances could impact who will win the starting spots when the regular season begins. Yes, it's just OTA training, but the energy around this team feels different now. Certain players arrived at this offseason under pressure and, instead of backing down, are making noise in every practice. Others, they're already falling behind. But before revealing everything that's happening in Dolphins training, don't forget to like this post if you still believe this team can surprise a lot of people this season. And if you remain optimistic about the Miami Dolphins' future, comment now. Go Dolphins! My heart bleeds turquoise and orange. Now let's get straight into it, because one of the biggest surprises from these first OTA sessions has been the emergence of Jordan Phillips. According to reports coming directly from practice observations, the second-year defensive lineman has been one of the absolute standouts of the entire offseason program so far. The former fifth-round pick out of Maryland has apparently been creating major problems during team drills, especially during the 11-on-11 sessions shown to the media this week. One report specifically described Phillips as dominating the period, and suddenly people around the Dolphins are beginning to wonder whether he could seriously push for a much bigger role than originally expected. And here's where things become fascinating. There's already discussion surrounding the possibility that Jordan Phillips could eventually challenge for a starting role opposite Zach Sealer. That conversation alone should tell Dolphins fans how impressive he has looked early on. Nothing is guaranteed in May, of course, but when a young defensive lineman starts generating this kind of attention before pads even come on, people inside the building notice immediately. Meanwhile, not everybody is trending upward right now. Rookie wide receiver Caleb Douglas is already facing questions after multiple drops during practice sessions this week. What makes this situation more concerning is the fact that drops were already considered one of his biggest weaknesses coming out of Texas Tech. The physical tools are there. The size is there. The athletic ability is there. But the consistency catching the football continues to show up as a concern. And Dolphins fans know how difficult it is for young receivers to earn trust if they struggle at the catch point. What makes this more uncomfortable is that Douglas himself reportedly admitted recently that improving his hands was a major priority, yet only weeks later the drops are still happening on the practice field. That is not the type of early impression a rookie wants to make during a crowded competition. On the other hand, one receiver who is turning heads in a completely different way is Malik Washington. Through these first 2 weeks, his name keeps surfacing again and again whenever practice standouts are discussed. Reports indicate he has consistently flashed during sessions, making plays and building chemistry with the quarterbacks during drills. This is especially important because there were already conversations about whether Washington could face real competition for his roster spot due to other slot receiver options entering the picture. But instead of fading into the background, Washington appears to be doing the opposite. He is making himself impossible to ignore right now. If he keeps stacking strong practices like this, the Dolphins may have no choice but to expand his role moving forward. Now let's talk about one of the more worrying developments from OTAs. The quarterback depth battle behind the top names has apparently been rough. Reports from practices mention inconsistency from multiple quarterbacks during these sessions, with interceptions and uneven performances becoming recurring themes. Cam Miller reportedly had some positive moments in earlier practices but also struggled this week, including throwing a pick-6 during drills. Mark Gronowski has also reportedly had a difficult start to OTAs overall. And while it is still extremely early, these reps matter. Coaches evaluate everything this time of year. Every throw, every mistake, every missed read. Players trying to secure roster spots cannot afford long stretches of inconsistency. Another name creating buzz defensively is Chop Robinson. According to practice observations, he was highly disruptive during the passing period shown to media this week and reportedly recorded multiple sacks during 11-on-11 drills. His burst off the line and athleticism have clearly been noticeable during non-contact work. Still, there is an interesting discussion happening around that performance too. Some observers believe Robinson naturally benefits from these early OTA conditions because there are no pads and offensive linemen cannot fully counter his explosiveness physically yet. So while the flashes are exciting, many people are also waiting to see whether that same dominance continues once training camp becomes more physical later this summer. And then there is Jaylen, whose name has unfortunately surfaced for less encouraging reasons. One of the biggest criticisms surrounding him continues to involve his passing game impact and overall receiving consistency. Reports from Wednesday's practice mention another drop during drills, and concerns about his ability in the passing game are apparently still lingering around the coaching evaluations. Defensively, however, the secondary might quietly be becoming one of the most intriguing groups on the roster right now. Several defensive backs have reportedly made strong impressions over these first 2 weeks, including Chris Johnson, Juju Brents, Jason Marshall Jr., and others who have been making plays consistently during team drills. Coaches have apparently praised versatility and aggressiveness from the group, and there is growing optimism that this secondary could surprise people if development continues at this pace. At the same time, one player who may be losing valuable ground is Storm Duck. According to reports, he has missed the first 2 weeks while rehabbing from injury, and that absence is becoming increasingly problematic because other defensive backs are getting live reps, learning the system, and building momentum while he remains sidelined. In a crowded competition, availability matters, and every missed practice creates a bigger uphill battle. Right now, the biggest storyline may simply be how quickly certain players are separating themselves from the pack before mandatory minicamp even starts. Some names are building serious momentum already, while others are starting to feel pressure after only a handful of practices. And honestly, the situation around several roster battles may already be far more intense than many fans expected this early in the offseason. The deeper you look into these OTA practices, the more it feels like the Dolphins are entering one of the most competitive offseasons we have seen in a while. Every single practice rep suddenly matters because there are multiple position battles quietly developing behind the scenes, and some players are taking advantage of every opportunity while others are watching the pressure build week after week. What makes this even more intense is that mandatory minicamp has not even started yet, which means coaches are still gathering first impressions that could shape depth chart decisions later this summer. And honestly, one of the most fascinating developments right now is how much attention the defense is getting compared to the offense during these sessions. Reports coming from practices continue highlighting defensive playmakers making life difficult for the quarterbacks and wide receivers. That alone is creating debate among fans because some people see it as a sign that the defense is improving dramatically, while others wonder whether the offensive inconsistencies are becoming a bigger concern than expected. Take the secondary, for example. The amount of praise several defensive backs are receiving right now is impossible to ignore. Chris Johnson has reportedly been showing versatility by lining up both inside and outside, while coaches and observers have consistently mentioned how quickly he moves and how effective he has looked in coverage situations. Then you have Juju Brents making splash plays, including forcing a fumble during practice work. Jason Marshall Jr. has also reportedly been involved around the football consistently. Suddenly, there's a real feeling that this secondary may become much more competitive internally than many people expected entering OTAs. And that is exactly why Storm Duck's situation becomes even more difficult. Missing time during this phase of the offseason can completely change the trajectory of a roster battle. While other defensive backs are stacking reps, building chemistry, and learning on the field, Duck is still rehabbing and trying to catch up from the sidelines. And let's be honest, this league moves fast. Coaches reward availability. If younger players continue flashing every single week while someone else remains unavailable, those opportunities can disappear quickly. That is why these next practices could become absolutely critical for players trying to climb back into the conversation. At wide receiver, the contrast between Malik Washington and Caleb Douglas is becoming one of the biggest stories of the offseason program so far. Washington keeps receiving positive reports for making plays and consistently standing out during practices. Meanwhile, Douglas continues fighting the same concerns that followed him into the league. And fans know this is